Hi, everybody. We are looking at chapters 4 through 9 this week, so I'm just going to give a really brief introduction to those chapters and then look through these questions and maybe give you a few suggestions. I see some of you have already submitted. That's great. If you, of course, ever want to change what you put down, you can always resubmit. Or if you're getting this and you're not quite there yet, that's fine. You can still submit it in the next day or two, and I'll definitely take a look. Anyway. So chapters 4 through 9, this is where we really get introduced to Sybil Vane. In chapter 4, Dorian is going to have dinner with Henry and Lord Henry, and he is meeting him at Lord Henry's house. We meet Lord Henry's wife, who's really weird and kind of flighty and unhappy. She might in some ways be modeled on Oscar Wilde's wife, but I don't believe Oscar Wilde's wife was particularly flighty or anything. It's just that they had sort of a double, he led a double life, so their marriage wasn't exactly authentic in every way. And so, of course, that might be mirrored in Lord Henry's situation as well. But anyway, so he meets her. They go to dinner. He tells Henry that he is in love with an actress named Sybil Vane, and the name Sybil Vane is full of meaning. It's basically like a Harry Potter type name, where the name means something. Sibyls were Roman priestesses who told the future, and Vane, of course, I think would be something about vanity. So this is a prediction about future vanity. Makes total sense if you think about it. All right, so he falls in love with Sybil. He tells Henry and Basil how much he loves Sybil, how wonderful she is. She's an amazing actress. She does all sorts of Shakespearean work. He's seen her in all sorts of things. He's been impressed. The theater she's in is very, very cheap. Not a nice theater, but and she is not rich, but he is in love with her. We find out in I think chapter 5 that she actually is in love with him or thinks she is, and she's very impressed with him, and she is very set on marrying him. And remember, Sybil's brother, James Vane, is leaving for Australia, but before he goes on the ship, which of course will take a long time, he wants to make sure that she's going to be happy, and she says she will. And Sybil's mother is very much in favor of this match because she believes Dorian is rich. So then, of course, Basil and Lord Henry are invited to see the show. They go to see the show. Sybil is terrible. She does a terrible job. She's an awful actress that night. And Dorian can't figure out what's wrong. And he goes to talk to her. And she says, "Oh, it's because of you. I will never act well again because now I know what it really is to love," which, kind of corny, but whatever. And then he tells her, "Oh, well, you just disgust me. I don't like you anymore. I can't possibly marry you. You're a third-rate actress." And he spurns her. He tells her she's not good enough for him, and then he leaves. And then of course when he gets home, he notices that there is a slight change to the portrait. Now there is a hint of cruelty in the mouth. It looks the same, but there is this look to the mouth that's somewhat cruel. So anyway, the next day he notices that's still there, and he's a little freaked out about that. But he decides to just hide the painting, and he also decides that he's made a mistake, and he doesn't want to be a cruel person. He doesn't want the painting to show all the bad things he does, so he wants to keep his soul clean. And so to that end, he decides that he will marry Sybil. And of course, Lord Henry comes and gives him the bad news that Sybil's dead. She's killed herself. She took poison. And so Dorian blames himself. Lord Henry talks him out of that. He tells him it wasn't your fault, you didn't do anything wrong, etc., etc. So Lord Henry often plays a role of tempter, something like a Satan figure in the Garden of Eden or something. That's pretty typical for Lord Henry, and I think it's appropriate at that point to see him that way. But anyway, Lord Henry is is then talking to Dorian, kind of talks him out of it. They decide to go see the opera, so they go do that. And then they do, and the next day Basil comes over and wants to commiserate with Dorian and tell him how sorry he is about Sybil. And Dorian doesn't seem that upset about Sybil, and he finds out that Dorian went to the opera, and he's a little disgusted with Dorian and doesn't understand why he would act this way. And he asked, the other important thing is he asks to see the painting and he wants to exhibit it. And Dorian makes a big deal about it and says he can't possibly do that, and it's not fair, and so on and so forth. And so Basil relents, but at that point Dorian realizes that he will have to hide the painting. So that's chapters 4 through 9. Kind of the Sybil Vane section. It's all about her, his relationship with her, not so much her. All right, so let's look through these questions then. Number 1, how does Dorian falling in love with Sybil make comments on art and the aesthetic movement? Well, think about it. Why does he love her? Is it for her personality? Does he know anything about that? Or is it just for her art and how aesthetically pleasing she is and her acting is? That might be something to look at. Why do you think Lord Henry doesn't confront Dorian over Sybil? I mean, you could think about that. Is there something else going on there between them? Do they maybe does Lord Henry look at this? I mean, he does kind of look at Dorian as an experiment. Maybe he wants to see how this plays out. There are a couple options there. Her pure joy at being in love provides poignant contrast to the manipulative intentions that Dorian calls love. Why is this contrast necessary? Cite examples of her virtue and purity as evidence. So that's an interesting one. Certainly Dorian and Sybil are opposites in how they feel about love and each other. Now, granted, she can't really know him that well, but at least she doesn't seem to want him just for his money, or so she says. Her mother does, but she doesn't say that. So you might talk about her virtue and purity, and I would look more in chapter 5 for that, because that's where you're really going to see, you see a little bit of it when Dorian spurns her, but you would see a lot of it in chapter 5 where she's talking to her brother. Do you think there is any ambiguity in the text at this time as to whether Dorian will be the hero or the cad? What purpose would ambiguity serve? A cad is somebody who is a bad guy, a lout. You probably don't know that word either. A cad is like a chump, if you're familiar with that word. He's a guy who's he's not a hero. He treats people badly. So do you believe there's anything at this point that shows that Dorian will in fact be a hero rather than a cad? Do you think that's already set, or is that still up in the air? Look at the first description of the changes in the painting in chapter 5. Break down the passage to explore the deeper meaning and comment being made. Remember, there's a hint of cruelty to the mouth. So this would be a lot like that last week, where you could deconstruct that section. That's kind of what you would do. You'd look at that very little section and what all the words mean and what maybe Wilde is suggesting about it. And what that suggests for maybe some of the future as well, not just what that suggests about that scene itself. How does Dorian's dismissal of Sybil's death affect the reader? How does this moment construct Dorian for the rest of the text? So, when he finds out about her death, and he's able to dismiss it pretty quickly because of what Lord Henry says, how does that make you feel about Dorian? And what do you think that's going to show about his behavior throughout the rest of this text? Is it predictive in any way? Basil is the artist and Dorian the subject, so how does the contrast between the natures of the two characters comment on art itself? And that's a great question. Basil is one of the kinder people in this text. He is infatuated with Dorian at the beginning. Whether he still is something up for debate. But even if he is infatuated, and we might say that's a little strange, but he doesn't take advantage of Dorian. If Basil is in some way into him in whatever way, as an aesthetic, an aesthetic piece, as a person, whatever, he doesn't take advantage of Dorian in any way. He doesn't try to change him necessarily. And he also seems to have, I think, decent morals. He feels bad for Sybil. He wants to think the best of people. So Dorian is not quite so good at this point, or at least doesn't seem to be. So what does that say? That Basil's the one who creates, and that's how he behaves, and Dorian is the one who is the beautiful one and the one who is chafed after. What does that say about that? All right, a life devoted solely to the pursuit of selfish pleasure will always be marred by self-consciousness and fear, or self-conscious fear. Cite three pieces from the text from this chapter to support the idea and explain. So, a life is devoted solely to the pursuit of selfish pleasure will always be marred by self-conscious fear. So, pursuing pleasure in life, is that going to end up being bad, essentially? Is it always going to make you self-conscious about something, or is that not the case? You would want to find three things from these chapters that support that. And you could probably look, I would say, at the parts after Sybil's, after he has the fight with Sybil, and then when he's talking to Henry, when he's worried about the painting, and when he's talking to Basil. And why has Wilde included the comment that Dorian will turn to Basil in a time of trouble? So interesting, question. Is Basil something of a father figure for him? Does he know that maybe Basil has a better moral compass than Lord Henry? You could go a number of different ways with that. So, if you have any questions about this, feel free to get in touch. I saw that some of you already posted. That's great. If not, just work on that and post it for me. And I'm trying to put grades into the Google Docs themselves, but of course I'm keeping a Google Doc of grades on my computer. Now I can't share that with you because it has everybody's grades in it, but if you keep track of all your grades and just add them all up at the end and average them, you'll know the percentage you get. And again, as long as you're over a 60, you're getting that pass. So if you're doing well on all your assignments and they're all over 60%, you have nothing to worry about. All right, everybody, thank you very much. Have a good weekend, and get in touch if you need me.